Here's a couple of statistics. More than a third of Australian businesses expect to find it more difficult to meet financial commitments. 41% of businesses report failing revenue. 22% had an increase in operating expenses. And so it goes on. So what are the difficulties for small business to cope during this pandemic with opening and closing? And as well as that, just the number of people coming in. So if you want to join us, 1300 800 222 as an employee of someone that's in a small business that's being affected by COVID. If you are a small business owner yourself and you want to tell us about the difficulties that you've come across and how hard it is dealing with this pandemic, 1300 800 222. Joining us shortly, Mathew Dickerson, small business consultant. 1300 800 222 is the number to call. Sarah Storer and Catherine, if you want to join us as we take a look at the difficulties small business are going through at the moment, how we can assist small business, those of us that are working and we can get out and about, the businesses that are affected more than others. If you're involved, 1300 800 222, either as a staff member of a person in small business or as a small business owner yourself. Give us a ring. Tell us what it's like and the difficulties that you're going through at the moment. 1300 800. Text us on 0437 774 774. Mathew Dickerson is a small business consultant, joins us on the program this morning. Hello, Mathew.
It seems to be a bit of a rerun, doesn't it, Trevor? And I'm sorry, I want to move on to some new topics, but this one just seems to keep popping up.
It's very relevant for so many people, not only for those that own small businesses, but for those working within small business. And given that small business is the biggest employer of Australians, you can see why.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it is one of those things, Trevor, that we keep coming back to it because we're still in this rerun since March last year. We thought it would be a couple of weeks, a couple of months, maybe 6 months, maybe 12 months. And here we are still. Snap lockdowns are happening all over the country. Borders are still closed. And businesses are having to learn different ways of doing things. And what's been evident to me, and I kind of knew this already, but this sort of thing really points it out, is that businesses, small businesses in particular, are really resilient and they come up with new ways, reinvent themselves, work out new ways to make things happen. And I say that in a broad brushstroke. Obviously, there have been, unfortunately, victims along the way in terms of business victims, and some businesses have closed their doors. Some businesses have been in industries that you just don't know how they can come back from it. I mean, we've got some major businesses, obviously, airlines, for example. Wow, who'd want to be in charge of an airline at the moment? But some of the ancillary businesses, some of the tourism operators that book people on airlines, or some of the provision of services to those airlines, I mean, all this flow-on effect. So there are some business sectors that are very tough, but in general, what I've seen is that resilience is there. Businesses come up with ways to just keep punching on.
Within that, though, is it difficult opening, closing, or is it better to stay open or stay closed for a longer period of time? Which is better?
I think it's one of those things, Trevor. It's the unknown factor. When I was at high school and I'd ask a pretty young girl out and she'd say maybe, that was the worst answer she could give because you just were left in that state of limbo. And businesses, it's the same scenario. If you have to close, you close the doors. How long is it going to be for? A week? Okay, I can live with that. My staff know that it's a week they can do something and I can get by for cash flow. Oh no, now it's 2 weeks. Oh, that's bad. Oh, we're back at work again. Oh, good. We're off and going again now. Oh no, we're locked down again. So that sort of stopping and starting, I think, is incredibly difficult. Again, I'm not having a go at the politicians here. It is such an unknown. There's no playbook on, when a pandemic hits, here's step number 1 and here's step number 7 later on that'll finish it all off. We really don't know what's happening. So while the politicians are making these decisions and learning about the process, businesses are doing the same thing. So I am of the firm opinion, Trevor, that it makes it tough when we have to stop and start and stop and start. There's not an easy solution to that to say, let's just stop for 6 months, because again, that may not be the solution. So it's tough, but again, businesses are having to learn to cope with that.
Is it the case also that people went, okay, I could handle it the first time and we did okay. The second time gets harder. When we start to get into the third and fourth and fifth time is when it starts to really stretch small business?
You are absolutely spot on. And that's what I'm seeing more and more of now as we're going through some of these latest lockdowns with the Delta strain, obviously. I'm just seeing that morale being sapped from people. Small business owners are often, in my opinion, very upbeat, very positive people. But each time you do it, it just sucks away a bit more and it just chips away at their morale. And, it just gets gets so demoralising each time. And for some of them, it can be just the financial state, so that you're getting towards a stage with a small business where you might be towards the end of your business life, you might be looking towards retirement, you might have put some money away, and then suddenly you're chewing away at that nest egg, or your financial plans suddenly start to be impacted. But you also tend to care a lot about your staff, and you don't like to see your staff missing out on that income, or even if they might have gotten JobKeeper in the past, for example, then they're still not getting as much as they would have, or they might be missing out on some commission. So there's a whole range of things that make it very tough mentally for some of those small business owners and employees.
How difficult was it to qualify for, or is it to, I know that it will vary from state to state to state, to be able to qualify for the assistance?
It does vary a lot. You're spot on there, Trevor, that it varies a lot from state to state. And I think what we learned during JobKeeper was it was very easy for the government, the federal government in that scenario, to say, let's roll that out and make it really easy for people. And then we saw some big cracks that things went through, and some scenarios where we went, well, those people received a lot of money from our government, from us, and they didn't really deserve that. And I can't be too critical on a government that acted quickly and rolled things out and didn't have the plan perfect, because there was no time to get that plan absolutely perfect. I think we've learned from that as we've gone forward, and now the assistance that's out there, there's a few little hoops to jump through. In general, it's okay, but there's still glaring examples where things just haven't quite worked, or there's been specific scenarios where it hasn't worked. But in general, it's not too bad. But the problem is when you've got, say, a 1 week lockdown, which we've seen in certain areas of Australia at the moment, a 1 week lockdown doesn't normally qualify you for any assistance whatsoever. So you just have to suck it up and hope that everything's going to be okay in a week's time.
I was just also thinking about how it would be for people that were starting their business 2 years ago, that have decided that they want to take that big step and to go into business for themselves the first time in the beginning. That would have knocked people around something shocking.
You would have to say that if you're going to pick timing as the worst timing ever to start a small business, then the beginning of last year was that time. Now, having said that, there have actually been some winners out of this, Trevor. And it's interesting. You can't always know what's going to happen when something hits. So hardware stores, for example, have been going gangbusters. Supermarkets we've seen going well as well. But for example, if your idea was to start a small handyman business, you might have actually done quite well, because lots of people were at home, they were doing some work around their home, and they might have needed a bit of extra help to just get some expertise in an area, or maybe an extra set of hands to, I don't know, clean out the gutters or something like that. So you might have actually been okay if you started that type of small business. But again, if your dream was to open that cafe and you opened it in February last year and you're finally out serving your perfect coffees, and then March comes along, that would have really knocked you around, and then you might not have had the financial backup that you've built up over many years to actually survive that. And that's some of those businesses that did go to the wall with those new businesses.
When you talk about the financial backup, because people who are in business would know very well that there can be peaks and troughs as far as operating a small business is concerned anyway. So are we at a stage now where people may have actually lost that nest egg that they've kept because they're a good small business and they know that those things are going to happen, but you can only have so much backup to be able to survive? Yeah,
it is like a farmer, isn't it? A great farmer might have their store of hay and might have all their plans for a drought that goes for 1 or 2 years. But when you start hitting that third year, it starts making it tough. And you're spot on. Some of these businesses live in areas where they might know there are some peaks and troughs. They might be serving the farming sector, for example. Think of an ag supply business. They know that there'll be a drought come along one day and then there'll be rain and they'll be able to sell to them again. So they've got those peaks and troughs in their planning. But I had a conversation with one particular small business at the beginning of last year, or the beginning of the pandemic last year, and he'd just gone through a whole process with his strengths and weaknesses and his opportunities and threats and his full SWOT analysis, and had the 5-year plan for the business. And he was saying to me, nowhere in that planning did he say, what about when a pandemic hits? What does my business do then? It's not something anyone would have talked about. In fact, you would have been laughed at. Imagine sitting on a board of directors for a business at the beginning of last year saying, now, when a pandemic hits, what's our plan? And everyone would say, well, stop wasting your time with that. We don't need a plan for that. When's the last pandemic? It was the beginning of last century. So let's move on to something more important. But again, now you've gone through this for so long, some of those businesses that didn't have the plans there might have burn through some of that finance that already built up behind them.
Through news services, we hear an awful lot about large companies and the amounts of people that are laid off, which is tragic because if you're hearing about hundreds, thousands of people losing their jobs in large companies, it's always tragic. However, we don't hear about the number of people that are losing jobs within small business because they're not as grand in scale and it doesn't necessarily make big media.
You're right. One person losing their job from a small business that employed 3 people in the past, you don't actually hear about. But it's actually quite interesting, Trevor. There are actually staff shortages that are being reported by businesses, which just doesn't make sense. You think, how can there possibly be staff shortages at the moment? But in a recent survey, 19% of businesses said they had staff shortages. And some of those were specifically related to the pandemic. In other words, 34% of those said that they had staff that couldn't work because of COVID-19. Now, that might have been due to family members being impacted or maybe during lockdowns where they couldn't have staff coming into work. So that's kind of makes sense and that's obvious. Some people said 48% said they couldn't afford staff. So again, their income might have been down. So they needed extra staff to actually run the business, but they just literally couldn't afford it. Their revenue had dropped dramatically enough. But 57%, they just couldn't find the suitable staff. Now, in the past, we've had a flow of people internationally. We've had people, our borders have been obviously open and people have flowed in and out internationally. So we've been able to get suitable staff, if not from our own country, from overseas. But obviously that's not happening and that makes a bit of a hole in some businesses as well.
Hospitality has been affected enormously because of shutdowns and opening up and shutting down and opening up. I know that our neighbours, their children have a cafe in Melbourne and they're finding it incredibly hard to find staff. Very, very hard to find staff within the hospitality industry and for their cafe. I wonder whether or not people who used to work with an industry, it's not as if they don't want to work, but they're actually going other places to find work because they can't be in work, out of work, in work, out of work.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it as well. 19% of businesses said they had difficulty retaining staff, and that's part of the reason. Because if someone said you can come and work in this, say, for example, government job where we know we're going to need you every week and the government's got money to keep paying you, or work in a perfect example, Trevor, the hospitality industry where, look, we're open this week, but next week, maybe not. We don't know. It takes away the incentive or the desire to keep turning up when you don't know whether you're going to have a job tomorrow or you don't know if you're going to get paid tomorrow. You've got your own mortgages, you've got your own expenses. So that difficulty to retain staff is part of that problem where you do have businesses that are opening and closing.
And these are people that love working in hospitality.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily that they can't depend on the work anymore within hospitality. So how do you deal with it?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And the whole process there is that you've got people who do have a passion, they love what they're doing, but if you just can't get a job in it or you're not sure about the future of that job, and that's that uncertainty that I talked about before, Trevor, when you've got that maybe, when you're not sure if you've got a job tomorrow, nothing to do with you, nothing to do with your employer. You can run the best possible business and you can have a great employee and do a fantastic job. But in this scenario, it's one of those rare scenarios that it really is so much taken out of your hands and you can be as creative as you possibly like. And there are some segments of the market that you just simply can't say they're going to be able to stay open.
We're taking a look this morning at the difficulties of small businesses at the moment and staff who work within small businesses. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask or comments you'd like to make about how it's operating, 1300 800 222. And if you are a person that's helped support small businesses in your area, how do you go about doing that? 1300 800 222, text 0437 774 774. 1300 800 222. I got a text here. This is 100% of businesses I deal with every day are struggling with staff shortages. I'd hear 30 times a day, how can we have people sitting on their backsides when there's so much work out there? Is it necessarily the case that people don't want to work, Matthew, or that, as I just said, it's a changing nature of the workplace and people are actually perhaps going to different places?
There was some criticism last year, Trevor, and I think we did speak about this in a previous session where JobKeeper made it maybe more attractive for some people to stay at home and take the money from JobKeeper, even though it was less, but you're doing nothing for it. Now, that's obviously past now. We've come back out of JobKeeper, so maybe some of those people become accustomed to doing that. But I don't really see, it might be a bit anecdotal, but I don't really see a lot of evidence to suggest that there are people lazing around, drinking their tequilas all day and watching Netflix, but not wanting to go into work. I think there is a desire for people to go into work. Maybe they're a little bit pickier with what they do, or maybe, exactly as you said, they just don't want to go to work somewhere where they don't know whether they've got a job tomorrow. But it is interesting, that sort of anecdote where that listener has said 100% of businesses that he sees are looking for staff or having trouble with staff. Obviously, I said a moment ago, 19% is the official figure. But again, lots of people just say anecdotally, oh, gee, I could use some more staff. If only I could find them. And it's pretty tough in this environment to go out looking for staff. You're so busy just seeing, what can I come up with? What can I do? How can I be creative to keep my business going? Oh, I need some more staff as well. Sometimes that's one of the things that falls off the radar to go out and focus on. So there can be a number of reasons there.
Scotty, good morning.
Hey, Trevor, how you going?
Yeah, good, Scotty.
What about you, Matthew? How are you?
Yeah, fantastic, actually.
Yeah, me too. Hey, listen, I want to say from the outset, I don't want to trivialise anybody's woes right now, because what I'm going to say is possibly a little bit inflammatory. Mm-hmm. But I run a small business about 2.5 months a year, and it's very niche and rah. That's not of interest. What's of interest is that I look around me at the moment, and I know a lot of hospitality people, which is the industry that I sort of dabble in. I see smart operators lowering their threshold of costs, taking the assistance that's offered by both, localised state and federal governments, and they turn around what could be a really awful and anxious-laden situation, and they improve their bottom line. And I see it in about 8 or 10 operators around my local area, which I then go and support them. And it's a joy to watch. But what really, really scares me is that if you take that small business initiative and you take it up the chain to middle business, large business, and then ultimately to our elected officials in government, I look at the elected officials at the moment and I see fear in their eyes. I see anxiety. I see tired people who need a little bit of respite and possibly a good holiday.
Matthew?
Yeah, look, one of the things that, interesting, focusing back on your first point there, Scott, is that you have an opportunity, if you look at this as an opportunity, and some people struggle when they're right in the middle of it, but you have an opportunity to actually reset what you're doing in business, reset your overall business model, look at everything that you're doing, analyse everything you're doing. I mean, advertising is probably a classic issue there where people say, we better cut back our advertising because we've got this pandemic and it makes it very tough. And I actually say to businesses a lot, you should be looking for ways to swim upstream. Do the opposite of what other people are doing, but more importantly, analyse what other people are doing. So if everyone else has stopped advertising, what I see there is an opportunity that maybe you should be advertising because you're not hearing any ads for any of your competitors. What a great opportunity for you to get in there. Now, that's a very simplistic example, but just that overall reset on your business, looking, as you said, Scott, looking at the expenses scenario, looking at everything that you're doing in business and just justifying it. And you might find at the end of all that 90% of what you're doing or have been doing has been absolutely perfect, but it does give you that opportunity to reset and really analyse your business, and maybe you come out at the end of it all, hopefully, with an even better business than you had before the start of it all.
For people who are in medium-sized or really big business, are they coming out of this, or are there different rules for big business than small business?
Do you mean in terms of just running the business, or do you mean in terms of government?
In government, because it just seems, and because there's some really big businesses have come out of this with a profit. I mean, they're doing really, really well. But I guess that might be the same with some small businesses as well. Yeah, and there are some people who manipulate the market. I have talked to some small businesses, and I'm disappointed to even say that I know some of these people that have deliberately closed down at the beginning of the whole lockdown so that they could get their 1/3 drop in income, and then they'd get their JobKeeper, and then they'd go on and keep trading and everything was fine, yet the government's paying their wages for the next 6 months. So there are some people who saw that as being smart,
personally, and maybe I'm going too far on an ethical side here, Trevor, but personally I saw that JobKeeper was there for businesses that desperately needed it. If you could have traded through it, then you should have done that. And I remember talking to the manager of one of my businesses and I said, I don't want JobKeeper. I don't want the money from the government because I want us to work out a way we can trade through this and not drop our income to that level, because if some businesses need it, let them have it. And we were lucky enough, and hopefully some good management in there as well, to work through that and not take any JobKeeper from the government. Having said that, that's not always possible. So if you're in a business where you had to do that, then that's fine. But I think there was a little bit of manipulation out there, and that's where it was all done so quickly. It was hard to have those checks and balances in place.
Jeff, hello.
Hi.
Yes, Jeff.
I'm at the lower end of the scale of business. I'm a non-registered for GST, and during the JobKeeper time, it was fine. We weren't eligible after or into the last quarter because we weren't down 30%.
Right.
But since then, now that Victoria is locking down from hard and often, there was no help through the Victorian government for non-GST registered businesses until this last couple of lockdowns, where when I go to the Business Victoria website, they say non-GST registered businesses are able to apply. Now, when I try and get details about how to apply, the website tells me to ring a phone number for helpful advice. And when I ring the phone number, it refers me back to the website, and I've got no idea how to apply.
These are the practical things, Matthew.
Yeah, you're right. And we do see a lot of that where a government department, not really set up to be agile and quick to react, tries to set up something in a quick scenario and they just don't get it right. It's as simple as that. Even our vaccine rollout, I think there's been lots of issues with our vaccine rollout across the country because we've had government departments who are normally used to doing planning and long-time strategic planning and putting all sorts of checks and balances in place, and suddenly someone says, let's do it quickly, and they're just not set up to do that. And so I have heard a few scenarios, like Jeff mentioned there, where things become circular, things don't work, you go to apply for something, you click on submit, and it won't. You submit a form because there's some piece of compulsory information that it's in there and it won't accept that. So all sorts of little scenarios along those lines. And there's no easy answer to that except potentially try and get onto someone. Getting hold of someone to talk to is a challenge as well, but getting hold of someone that can actually accept the fact that there is an error there, there's an issue there and it needs to be dealt with. And this is the problem. We do have things that are falling through the cracks because things are trying to happen so quickly. And again, it's pretty hard to be too harsh on any government in this scenario because things are happening so quickly, it's changing. And I feel for you, Jeff. I don't have an easy answer for you, but I feel for you because sometimes there are these scenarios where just things aren't happening the way they should.
Would Jeff's accountant be able to maybe give some advice, or people who are in a professional situation, are they more likely to be able to get through to government departments?
My experience with some of the professionals is they're hitting the same problems. They're not necessarily saying they've got a magic hotline they can ring and get some solutions to it. The one advantage of talking to someone like your accountant, it might be that accountant's had the same problem with 10 other of their clients and they finally managed to find someone that will talk to them. But exactly as Jeff said, sometimes you'll ring someone and they're so busy, it just goes straight through to a message service that says, sorry, don't leave a message, we're too busy, but go to this website. And you go to the website and it refers you back to the phone number and you get in an endless loop, and next thing you know, it's your whole day's been chewed up all week. So there is not an easy answer to that. I suppose perseverance is one of the answers to that. And some people have said to me, I probably qualify for some of the assistance, but at the moment I'm just busy trying to keep things ticking away. So I've given up on that, and that's not great. That's not the right answer, but sometimes it's a practical answer.
Mathew Dickerson, the small business consultant, is our guest this morning as we take a look at the struggle small businesses are going through COVID. Similarly, Hannah has said, I'm a small sole trader or home-based business, and I didn't qualify for help, so they don't earn enough money per month. Is that sort of one of the things that needs to be looked at, is the amount of money, but not only the amount of money, but spread out over a 12-month basis, Matthew?
That's one scenario, but those micro businesses is another area where it's been tough for the government to easily say, here's a formula that works for all those micro businesses. The reality is those micro businesses are essential to our economy. That person that's running that micro business might only be earning a similar amount that they might have been earning in a job, but the flexibility of that might mean they're really important for the economy. For example, Hannah, and I don't have any clue about Hannah's background, but Hannah might be someone who works in a micro business and has kids at school, for example, but they can work around the kids going to school and still being able to work from home. And that's good because you're not having to have someone in daycare after school. They might even have someone that isn't using the childcare facility, so it takes some pressure off that part of the market. So I'm a big fan of those micro businesses. I love when I talk to someone that's in a micro business because they're just in there having a go, not taking the safety of the wage and salary earner. And then some of those micro businesses grow. But again, these are the problems that you have. I think sometimes the politicians can get a little bit out of touch with what's happening in the real world, and sometimes they just don't understand the variety of businesses we have out there. I kind of get exposed to a small percentage of this every day, but still I couldn't say that I could understand every business out there, every micro business, every small business. But there's some really good people out there operating these businesses, and it's really tough for some of those at the moment.
Jono says, being a farmer, we always have some sort of backup plan that could last for years. All I'm hearing from major cities is they are basically living from hand to mouth and not really viable. As a proper business without support from the taxpayer, farmers are also suffering because the produce is in lower demand as well. And
there's an old saying that sometimes people have about 4 weeks from, I think it's an average sort of number, 4 weeks from being financially viable to not being financially viable. In other words, a wage and salary earner that's got their mortgage payments to meet and school fees and food on the table take their income away for 4 weeks, suddenly they're no longer financially viable. So what's been talked about there in terms of farmers have understood this experience for their entire life of their farming because they know they've got those severe ups and downs, and the good farmers plan for that. Again, I just don't know that anywhere in the business kit bag you have the pull-out plan 17 for pandemic. So it's all new territory for all of us.
See, that's one of the things, though, because if it wasn't for the number of lockdowns, I mean, some people may say that over a period of time, if a business can't survive through the low times, then perhaps those people shouldn't be in business. But in these cases, it's so many times in and out and in and out and in and out, it isn't necessarily the case.
No, it's an easy throwaway, Trevor, and I think that's very harsh on a lot of businesses. Oh, yeah. Well, that business was obviously on the brink. That's why they went broke. But pick on a travel agent, for example. Take a travel agent. They may be a very good operator, but you take away all that income from all those people booking holidays, all those airline flights, and on the flip side of that, you're actually giving money back to people, returning refunds, and still doing the work that you've got to do to get that money back to those people when they booked holidays at the beginning of last year. Gee, I don't care how good a business you are, it's pretty hard to say, yep, this business is only going to the wall because it wasn't a well-planned business. I mean, some of those businesses are very well-planned, but you just don't have those sort of things come up in your normal planning processes.
Good morning, Shane.
Good morning, how are you?
Good, Shane. You're up early?
Yeah, I've just finished work, pretty much just relaxing a little bit after work. I'm in WA, so that's a bit of a time difference, of course.
True.
Yep, but I'm working in a pub in Malawa. I've only been here for a couple of weeks, and we're desperate for staff, and so is every pub in the Midwest WA that I know of. I know of at least a half a dozen jobs going, especially for cooks. So if anyone in the hospitality industry in WA, because anywhere else can't get here, of course, unfortunately, if anyone's looking for work, have a look in the Midwest.
Hey, Shane, just within that, was it always hard to get staff, though?
Yeah, well, I've been running little pubs and occasionally using backpackers, and you've got to pay them recently fairly top dollar just to attract them out to the bush.
I mean, in some areas, the rent that people pay to actually work out of metropolitan areas can almost be the equivalent of what you get paid.
Well, not in the Midwest because usually accommodation comes with the job in the pubs.
Excellent.
Like I'm getting accommodation paid for here, meals are subsidised, and I'm getting a decent wage.
Shane, it's interesting though because, and we'll go back to Matthew on this, is that there's not only backpackers that come in from overseas that have been filling a lot of jobs like what you're talking about, but also just anybody from around the country that might be going to do a bit of a trip around the country. Then they're out of the question as well because nobody can travel between states.
I suppose, I don't know what the rules are over east in between your regions and your cities. Well, obviously, you're not allowed out of Sydney and mostly probably Melbourne. But if you are in the regions and you're looking for work, then just you sniff around a little bit, because everyone in the bush pretty much is looking for a cook.
Look, thank you. So these are where there are vacancies coming up, and it's so good to hear that they'll actually provide accommodation for staff as well, especially within the pubs, Matthew.
Yeah, and what Shane said there about the border closures, when I was talking about before, I was actually leaning more towards international borders, but Shane's hit a good point there. Because of the state border closures, there are people who, part of their lifestyle plan, say, we're going to trip around Australia and we're going to stop at places and do a 2-month stint here and a 2-month stint there and just look at Australia. Those people aren't able to do that sort of work now. So for a whole range of reasons, border closure is just another one of those reasons. It takes away that normal flow. And if you're going to trip around Australia, living at a pub, being a cook, I mean, that sounds like a pretty good scenario for a month or two and learn about the environment, and then you move on somewhere else. Someone else comes in and fills your spot. But of course, things have changed so much, Trevor, that what was the norm only a year and a half ago is obviously not the norm now. And we don't know what the new norm will look like. We don't know how long before we get there. So pubs are open up again. That's great. Pubs are doing it very tough. One of the hospitality industries, obviously, they were doing it very tough in the initial stages. Now they're doing it tough for a different reason, because people want to go there and they eat. They want to finally get out and they want to use their money, but they can't. One of the other things, Trevor, which I might have mentioned in a previous session, but the really interesting thing I found when I did some research on this is that the difference in expenditure in the past, in the old days, between people leaving our country as a tourist and coming into our country as a tourist was approximately $5 billion. So we were losing $5 billion, if you like, in tourism export. Both numbers were pretty big. It was around about $65 billion we spent going overseas, and we received about $60 billion for incoming tourism. But that $5 billion now, people have got in their hands now in this country, so they're able to spend some of that on maybe local tourism, or spend it in going and visiting a pub and having a meal where they might have been spending that on the Riviera or somewhere overseas. So we've actually got that money, but it's actually hard for people to spend that money because they can't actually get out and spend it.
David, good morning.
Oh, good morning. Listen, this is a wonderful discussion, and I might headline it by having listened to say, you're talking basically about small business at the moment, and the interaction with the private, with the small business economy and government, et cetera, and all the different things that have gone on since we've been under the impact of COVID-19. But I would like to suggest, like this headline, that life in general is a small business, and that no matter what you're doing, you could be looking after a household as a husband at home, or a housewife, or looking after a couple of sheep in the top paddock. No matter what you're doing in life is getting impacted by this COVID virus. And I've lived since the late 70s in the entertainment business. I've got 2 children that are involved in small business. One of them's a master chef. I'm witnessing something that is becoming a part of everyday life. We have to be flexible. Now, I'm not going to bang on.
No, that's all right, because I think you actually make quite a good point in a lot of ways, that we are all impacted in different ways, some of us more than others, whether it be emotionally, whether it be psychologically, whether it be in a monetary sense. But there are effects there for everybody, Matthew. Yeah,
that's right. And I like David's point. Yes, we are talking about small business. That's what this whole session is all about, Trevor. But obviously it is happening across the spectrum, whether you're in small business, large business, whether you're just sitting at home minding your own business. I've got one of my kids still at school, and suddenly yesterday the school went into lockdown, so suddenly she stays home for the next week and does her study from home. So it doesn't matter what you're doing in society, you cannot go through your day without having some impact from COVID-19. And it's almost an ongoing joke now when someone says, can we do this? Can we work out something? Can we change something? Whatever it might be. And people will just go, oh no, COVID-19. And everyone goes, oh, right, yep, fair enough. I went to order a new bike the other day, Trevor, and I'm a keen mountain biker. And I thought, well, maybe making up for my lack of fitness and getting old, I need a new bike to get me going. I went to order a new bike. It was a 250-day delay on a new bike. I mean, that just seemed crazy to me, but just a simple thing like buying a new bike, in the past, you would order one and it would be in 2 weeks' time. Now it's in almost a year's time. So everything you do in society is being impacted.
A text here from Reen that says the pandemic is highlighting the fact that an economy based on hospitality and tourism is so unreliable and not practical when the population is so restricted with lockdown. Industry and manufacturing may now be looked at in a different light. At the moment, the construction industry seems to be a workhorse as well. With all of these things that are happening, Matthew, do you think that there are going to be things to be learned just about the industries and business itself?
Yeah, and I think having that spread of industries, obviously any business would say you diversify to reduce your risk. And an economy diversified reduces risk. So if we had more manufacturing, and everyone in Australia says, oh, gee, I wish we had more manufacturing. Back in the old days, we manufactured. But it got to the point where we were quite happy as a world to have certain countries in the world that were doing a lot of our manufacturing. They had some cheaper labour rates, or they were better structured to do that manufacturing. So we did lose our manufacturing industry in this nation. I think we will see exactly that point. I think we will see a bit more manufacturing in this nation. I think that will be a good thing. Again, it diversifies our economy. It gives us less risk. We rely so much on mining at the moment, and unfortunately a lot of mining of coal, and I think we're seeing that we're going to have to slowly move away from that and not rely on that so much. So any economy, any business, having a whole range of ways to receive your income, that mixture, I think is really important.
We did talk back a while ago, taking a look at manufacturing. And we asked people to ring in with manufacturing that they knew of that was happening within Australia. And I was surprised at the amount of manufacturing that goes on that we don't know about and how niche that market can be, but also very profitable.
Yeah, and there's a mixture of that, Trevor. There are some places I know that will take the raw material from Australia, put it on boats, send it overseas to be finished off and then brought back here to be sold. And you think, well, that seems terrible. But that was obviously the best way to run that particular section. Some of the manufacturing we have had, I think you're right, I think it's probably been more niche. Some of the larger manufacturing, some of the bulk manufacturing, if you like, I think that has often gone overseas because of cheaper labour rates. But maybe we'll see that change a bit, and maybe it will be a change world. And hopefully out of anything like this, Trevor, what you're always hoping for is that out the other side we come with better solutions, better scenarios, whether that means manufacturing's part of our economic mix and it's a different part of it, that may be part of the overall mix we've got, and that probably is a good thing.
Yeah, and it may be that we need to recognise that some things are better manufactured overseas, some things are better manufactured here.
Yeah.
And we come to grips with those things as well.
Yeah, that's right.
It's always good to talk to you, Matthew. Thank you once again.
Thanks, Trevor.
Matthew Dickerson, who's a small business consultant. You're listening to Overnights on ABC Radio with Trevor Chappell. Thank you to all of the people texting. We've just referred...